Hello, my name is Bob Hinkles. I'm a CPA, have over 33 years of public accounting experience and taxation. I've also taught for over 30 years in seminars for CPAs around the country for the last 26 years. Today we're trying to finish up or to talk more about real estate basics for buying and investing. And so we'll pick up where we left off in the last program. Probably the most important word that you will ever hear in real estate purchasing is contingency. The word contingency should become your favorite word. Now the funny thing is that contingency is the most hated word by real estate agents, attorneys, settlement companies. They all dislike that word because what it does is it provides you with an assurance that something will happen before the deal is finished and completed. If you remember, I mentioned in one of the earlier shows that real estate, there are no lemon laws in real estate. Real estate is considered unique. And that's a legal term, unique, in that whatever you buy is what you get, and there's nothing you can do about it. They now have good faith disclosures where the people are supposed to say, yes, my basement leaks, my basement doesn't leak, I don't have termites, whatever. The point is that to sue people for that type of thing is very expensive, okay? And this is where the word contingency comes in to protect you. The word contingency has several meanings. In real estate, you make an offer to someone contingent upon the items that you list on the purchasing document, okay? And these contingencies must be satisfied to your agreement, or you're allowed to walk away from the entire deal and get back your hand money and earnest money, which we discussed earlier. Again, remember, once you sign a contract for real estate, you are legally bound by it. And you may have to buy the house even if you don't want to. Again, because there are specific laws in regards to that type of transaction. But a contingency allows you to demand that certain obligations be met before you purchase the house that you have actually signed a contract for. In other words, this is the way that you're able to, again, list things that you want completed before the house becomes your house, before you have to pay for it. And here are some of the basic contingencies you should be aware of. Every purchase, I don't care what part of the country it is, should always be contingent upon a pest inspection, including termites, and correction of any problems found during that inspection. 2 of my 4 houses that I've purchased and owned have had termites. Everyone was surprised, supposedly, but the point was they had to pay to have the termites eradicated and to replace some structural beams before we had the house. If we had not put that contingency in, then we would have been responsible to fix that. It's also contingent upon a building inspection by an expert of your choice, and your payment, of course, within a reasonable period of time. In other words, you can make the house contingent upon someone coming and inspecting the house, making sure it's not on top of a mine, or if there's other issues that could possibly come up, or if there's any rotted joints, or if the foundation is bad, but the building inspector will come and look at it. Another contingency that's very important, if you have your own home, is that the purchase of the second home is contingent upon the sale of your first home. In other words, that allows you not to have 2 mortgages at one time, which, as most of us know, could be rather expensive. The idea behind this is that it allows you to have a house tied up and on contract while you attempt to sell your own home. So again, so you don't have the 2 mortgages. Normally there's a definite time period that's involved in that. Like it can't be, I'm going to sell my house in 2 years. There has to be some reasonable constraints. Normally I've seen 3 to 6 months as the deal. Part of the problem with that contingency is that real estate agents and all the different people dislike that because it postpones the sale of the house until you actually sell yours. Part of the problem too is that you might be in a market where it's very difficult to sell your house, or you have a house in a bad location, or some of the things we spoke about previously. The point is that it's a great contingency to make and hopefully you get a buyer to agree to it. But it's something you should at least bring up. Okay, and then the last one, of course, is one of the last ones is that you should also have a contingency for different types of chemical tests and radon tests and things of that nature. One of the things that's become a hot button item or whatever for buying real estate today is mold. There are a lot of people with allergies in the United States, and so now, by the way, we used to only do pest inspections. Now we do radon inspections. If you're not in an area of the country where that's an issue, well, that's fine. I would still ask for it because it's rather minimal to run the test. The point is, though, is that, again, all of these contingencies you have to pay for. But please, please, don't even consider the cost of doing this, because not to have these contingencies and not to find out can be very detrimental when you finally do purchase the home. The purchase is contingent. This contingency thing is so important because it can be contingent on anything you want. Again, in a previous show, I mentioned you're like a pitcher in baseball. You throw the ball, nothing starts until you throw the ball. Well, the contingency is part of throwing the ball. And what you get to do is you get to list anything you want. Now, what will happen is you will make an offer with, let's say, 7 contingencies. What will happen is the buyer will not accept your first offer, and they'll make what's called a counter offer. And what they will do is they will try to change your contingencies or make them less palatable to you, or try to cut out some of them. Like, for example, the contingency about selling your home, you might put, well, I'll buy your house, but I need a contingency to sell my house for 6 months. Well, the person selling the home might say, no, that's too long, you only have 3 months. And then you would not accept their offer and counter offer, well, perhaps how about 5 months? And what happens is no one ever just puts down a bid on a house and it's accepted. If that happens, then somebody did something wrong. And normally it's the buyer who is unaware of some of the things that we're talking about. Again, contingencies are frowned upon by all the real estate people because it slows a deal down, and therefore it slows down or delays their commissions, and it's upsetting to them. So be aware that it's very important to know that everyone involved in the transaction will be pushing you to have less contingencies or not be so demanding in some of your contingencies. What's interesting about this is that, as I mentioned again in a previous show, there is no one on your side when you're buying a house. I mean, yes, I know your family's with you, all that stuff, and your friends, but all the professionals that are involved in selling that house have no concern for you in this matter. Now, they are professional, they do care, they do try to make, but the bottom line is if the house doesn't sell, they don't get paid. And again, you just have to be aware of that as this whole thing goes on. There's a concept also of deposit or hand money, which we'll discuss in a little while, okay? And if you don't have any contingencies and you walk away from a deal, 2 things can happen. Number one, they can keep your earnest money or your deposit. And the second thing is they can actually sue you for specific performance, which means that if all of your conditions were met, they can actually sue you to make you purchase the home. And that's a legal action that occurs frequently in the United States. I have a glossary of different phrases and terms that are used when we have, when you're buying and selling real estate. The glossary is from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. One of the things I would highly recommend is that you read the glossary. Now, you probably already know 80% of the words, but some of them might be new to you. And it's important that you know the terminology when people are talking about things. We're just going to hit on a few of them so that with some comments about them and how they can help you or not help you. The first word that we'd like to talk about in the glossary is the adjustable rate mortgage, also called an ARM. The adjustable rate mortgage is used by people because the adjustable rate mortgage normally starts out lower than the fixed rate. But over time, with inflation or other things that it's tied into, it can rise and it will almost always indefinitely go higher than the fixed rate, unless the economy stays in doldrums and the interest rates stay down. And, like the Fed Reserve has held the interest rates at a very low rate for a long time. Now, the problem with an adjustable rate is this. It has to be set to something. In the old days, prior to like 2000, it was always set to the federal rate. So when the Federal Reserve would keep the price down, keep the interest rates down, your adjustable rate mortgage would stay down. The problem was there wasn't enough money made in that scenario. So what they did was they changed it to, instead of the federal rate, to something called the LIBOR rate. That's LIBOR. It stands for a rate between banks out of London. Now, the problem is that the LIBOR rate goes up and down much more than the Federal Reserve rate. In other words, the LIBOR rate is much more volatile than the federal rate. And so therefore, you have to be careful about adjustable rate mortgages. One of the things that normally will happen is that the adjustable rate will allow you to be in a house for maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years before the adjustable rate gets up to what the fixed rate had been if you had purchased a fixed rate at that time, a fixed rate of interest. So adjustable rate mortgages can be very good because it allows you to get into the house, but always be aware that if that payment gets so high that you can't afford it, you will lose your house. And so you have to be careful and calculate what's the highest that rate can go to. The second word that's in the glossary is a balloon mortgage. What a balloon mortgage is normally used for is when someone wants to buy a house that's more expensive than they can afford. The balloon mortgage was very, very, very popular in California because the rates, the home rates were so high, plus interest rates were very high. When interest rates are high, people will take a balloon mortgage with the hope that they'll take a fixed rate, okay, and then for like a 5, 10, 15-year period, in the hope that at the end of that 5, 10, or 15-year period, the fixed rate will be lower. The problem with this mortgage is that at the end of that period, the 5, 10, or 15 years, there is a balloon payment. In other words, the entire mortgage becomes due at one time, and you definitely have to refinance and go find that money someplace else. Balloon mortgages are good if you're expecting to get a lot of money through a bequest, a gift, inheritance, or if you're planning on leaving your home before that 5-year period is up, that 5, 10, or 15-year period, because then what would happen is you'd be able to pay off the mortgage with the proceeds from the sale. The closing is just nothing more than when everybody gets together and you close on the house. Okay, and in fact, you get a HUD statement that's called a settlement sheet at the closing, and it will show all the expenses and income, or all the expenses that you have involved and the income to the seller. Closing costs are normally on page 2 of the settlement sheet, and what's on there are so many expenses that you'll be shocked, but it runs on an average for the purchaser. It runs on an average of 4 to 6%. So if you're buying a house for $100,000, the closing costs for you could be anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000. The reason you need to know that is that's additional funds you'll either have to borrow or come up with at the closing. Okay, a covenant is a legal term that basically means that people have given away some of your property rights for a good reason. In other words, there are certain parts in western Pennsylvania where people have oil wells on their property. Okay, well, the oil companies have a covenant to be able to drive across the property to get to the wells on the property. They actually have a covenant to drive across there, and they actually are allowed to build gravel roads across the land. Now, that's fine if you own 100 acres, and who cares if they use part of it. But what you have to be careful of is there's actually in some communities gas wells in the back of people's homes, and I've actually had a client who they bought a house. They didn't realize there was a covenant for this oil well. They knew the oil well was up there, by the way, but they didn't realize, they didn't pay attention to the covenant. And approximately 7 years after they bought the house, the oil company wanted to come in and put in a newer well. And they said, no, we're not going to let you. And they go, no, you have to. We have a covenant. Again, that's something that you want to make sure you find out before you purchase the house. The earnest money or hand money is money you put down. What this does, this shows how, quote unquote, how earnest you are for buying the property. Listen carefully. You always want to put down the least amount of money possible because you never want to be earnest. The more earnest you are, the more people will try to take advantage of you. So even though you like the house and you want the house, the idea is to just be calm about it and say, we'd like to buy the house, but we want to make sure all of our contingencies are met. Okay? A fixed rate mortgage just means that the interest rate for the mortgage is the same for the entire period, be it 15, 35, or 30 years, 15, 20, 30 years. Mortgage insurance is really strange. Mortgage insurance is something you pay, but it's not for you. Okay? What the mortgage insurance is for the banks so that they can turn around and sell your mortgage into the marketplace. All right? There's a lot of money that can be made in buying and selling mortgages, again, depending on if you have a fixed rate and the Fed rate goes up and down, as it goes up and down, the value of your mortgage goes up and down because the interest you're paying is higher or lower than what the market rate is. So this mortgage insurance allows the bank to take we'll call plus mortgages where there's more income than what the current rate is paying, and it allows them to be able to sell it and invest it. It's actually a very good tool for the economy. The problem is they make you pay it. Okay. By the way, that's part of the closing costs you have. The mortgage insurance premium. This is very important because people don't realize this. If you do not put 20% down for your house, I'll say this again, if you do not put 20% down for your house, and sometimes this fluctuates for banks, what will happen is that you will now have to pay a special insurance policy because they don't want you to come in, buy a $100,000 house, put $5,000 down, trash the house, and then the bank loses money because they can't recoup the $95,000 they lent you. So what they now have is they have a thing called, well, they've had it forever, but it's a mortgage insurance premium. And what they basically do is they insure the fact that you will either pay the mortgage or take care of the house. Now, it can be as high as 0.25% in some areas, and that's a very steep price to pay for this premium. Okay, but the point is they will you are legally required to pay for the mortgage insurance premium. Now, a quick aside. Once you have 20% down, let's say you buy a $100,000 house and you put $5,000 down. After approximately 8 to 10 years, you will have paid about $20,000 in principal on that home, okay? So you will have hit the 20% down. What's interesting is that unless you notify the banks, they're going to continue to charge you the mortgage insurance premium past that because they're not sure if you've had 20% down. Even though they have records, they're not confident or they're not sure, so you have to actually bring this up. It's a very important idea. A survey. A survey is something that where people come in and they measure with different engineering tools where they line up and make sure that all the property lines are proper and all that stuff. I would recommend that when you have a survey, that you have it, I believe the word is posted. And all that means is that they take and they put posts in the corners of the lot. All right. The reason is that once a property is posted, theoretically, that property does not have to be surveyed again as long as it's posted. In other words, someone can just say, oh, it's posted, and they know that it's already marked and it's pretty decent, that it's legally acceptable. Posting costs more than just a survey. Okay, if you post during a survey, it costs more than just getting a survey. The problem is that if you don't post it, okay, what'll happen is, let's say that you buy the land next door, okay, then you have to get another survey, and then what happens is they will also survey your property again, and you have to pay for another survey. So again, it's a very good thing to do. Something I personally do, which, I mean, some people think it's annoying, but personally I think it's important. The 4 homes that I bought, I had it posted. The first thing I did was I took and bought some string and I strung it between all the posts so that everybody in the neighborhood knew where my property line was. Because you have to be very careful. If somebody builds a shed on your property, Okay, and if you do not have them move that building within 5 years, actually it fluctuates depending on what state you're in. If you do not have them move that building within a certain period of time, they never have to move that building, even though it's on your property. Okay? Title insurance is a good thing. Title insurance is something you pay so that you have a clean title. In other words, the idea behind that is that with title insurance is that you have title to the house. The idea being is that you're in the house for 7 years and all of a sudden a person shows up at your door and says, my great-grandfather owned this property and it was taken from him illegally, and so the property belongs to me. Normally you laugh at people like that, but I've actually heard of instances, at least 3 in my lifetime, where it turned out that that was a true statement and the people were literally thrown out of their house because the property did belong to him, and because of the illegal taking 100 years ago, it voided all the transactions, all the legal transactions. And so therefore the property actually went back to that person. What the title insurance does is it pays your mortgage, so that, because remember, it's not your house, but you still have a mortgage on the house. I mean, the bank gave you money. Okay, now you can sue the people that sold it to you, but that's a very cumbersome process. So the idea here is that they just have title insurance and you get the money back that you had into the house, and it allows everybody to move on with their life. By the way, this also is one of the things that helps, again, ease the transfer of the mortgages to different people. But in this case, you actually have benefit also. In fact, if you look at the title insurance on the settlement sheet, it'll show that there's some for the bank and some for you. And the bank's is for the mortgage, and for you, it's the amount you paid for the house. So you would actually get back all your money, plus the bank would get back its money. Okay, that brings us to now, what can I afford? In other words, when you go to buy a house, it's very important not to buy a house that's too small or a house that's too big. The reason is, again, I go back to what I mentioned in the previous shows. The whole secret to real estate, if you buy a house to live in, you buy it because its location's what you want, the school district's what you want, all those different things. If you're buying, but it's nice to have appreciation where it goes up in value. The same thing is true for investments. In investments, you only want appreciation. Now, granted, you still have to have decent school districts, decent this, all the decent government things. But the fact is that you have to have appreciation to make it worth your investment. So back to the question, what can I afford? It was funny. The first house I ever bought, I went in and I was a little bit nervous, which is funny because, as I mentioned in the first show, I did real estate transactions. I did a lot of abusive tax shelters, real estate tax shelters, which were all totally legal and legitimate back in the early 80s. Okay, but what happened was when I finally was buying my own home, I could not believe the amount of fear and the amount of nervousness I had in regards to this whole transaction, even though I knew everything that I'm telling you now, and I had attended over 300 settlements for investment properties that our clients were buying and selling. But when I went to finally buy my own, and I got to this closing document, which is sometimes like 20, 30, 40 pages long, I started reading it. And the real estate agent looked at me and he said, "What are you doing?" Because remember, he just wants the settlement to be over so they can get paid. And I said, I'm reading the contract. And he says, "I'll tell you what that contract says." And I said, "Really, what is it?" And he goes, "If you pay, you stay. If you don't, you won't." And everybody in the room laughed. Now, personally, I was a little upset about that because I was looking for this person to be helping me and guiding me. And yes, that's a cute statement, but I have to admit, looking back, that it is a true statement. So the problem is if you buy a house and you can't afford it, you're going to be in really big trouble because what's going to happen 2 or 3 years down the road. So in the old days, before computers and all this other stuff, people used to say that you should use 25% of your net income should be your mortgage. Okay? Now, we'll talk about this a little later. The mortgage also, your payment that you make to the bank is your mortgage plus real estate taxes, which give you the total payment. But the fact is, your mortgage should be only 25% of your net income. So if you make $2,000 a month, okay, then and you net only $1,500. I'm sorry, let me make my math simple. $1,600, okay? Then your mortgage should really only be about $400 a month. Okay, that's 25% of the $1,600. The idea there is that if you have any more, it'd be really difficult to be able to pay the mortgage consistently for the 30-year period. Now, one of the good things is that, and this is why there's a little aside that people always say, oh, always buy the biggest house you can afford. And the reason is that over time, you'll get raises, inflation will kick in, the cost of everything will go up, and all of a sudden your mortgage will seem relatively low in comparison to your income. Okay? But the most important thing that you have to do to figure out how much you can afford is to sit down and work out how you spend your money. And also work on a budget. Now, one of the ways that you can do this is to just take for at least a month, preferably for 3 months, even more preferably for a year, where you take and you just track all your expenses for food, clothing, gas, car maintenance, insurance, everything that you have, college, whatever you have, okay? And just list it all and show all the expenses for an entire year. And then, including rent, of course. And then what you do is look at it and say, okay, how can I cut some of these expenses to have more money? It's one of the things that comes along with home ownership, is that normally some things have to be given up to be able to afford that larger house. Now, if you have $100,000 of income a year, you might say, well, I can afford any house I want. And the answer is that's not necessarily true. But the point is, obviously, it could be a nicer house. Again, remember, the whole key for real estate is that you want to buy property that's going to appreciate. So follow the logic. If I buy a house for $50,000 and I own it for 30 years and it appreciates 100% to $100,000, that's really a good thing. I've made decent money with my property. However, if I push myself and I buy a $75,000 house, then what happens? Well, over the same period, it doubles in price to $150,000. So that's the whole purpose, or the whole thought process behind buying the biggest house you can. With rental properties, it's twisted a little bit. You really have to make sure that you can charge at least enough rent to be able to pay the mortgage. So it's kind of driven more by that than by your income. Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference in buying your personal residence and buying an investment property. All right. One of the things is about income, and this is very important, is you can't always control your income. I know a lot of people work overtime and things like that. I mean, I'm a CPA. Some CPA firms pay overtime during tax season, some don't. But there's usually some type of bonus or something at the end of tax season. And I count on that money every year. But the problem is you really can't control that income. There was one year actually where my bonus was almost half of what it was the previous year. When I discussed it with the people that I was working for, they said, well, the problem is we lost a really big client and so our income's down, so all the bonuses are lower. If you have a job where you can work overtime, there's a chance that you won't be able to work overtime at some point. So even though the overtime is very good and I would bank it and save it or put it aside or whatever, I wouldn't count on it for mortgage expenses. Okay, that's something you have to be very careful of, because if for some reason they cut overtime for any reason, then you would be in trouble as far as making your mortgage payment. Okay. The other thing too is that markets, the value of the house, remember we talked about buying the biggest house you can, the value of homes is incredibly different even within a town. It's amazing to me how you can go into one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the United States and you can find some little 3-bedroom house sitting in some little lot that's for sale for half of what the other buildings are. Again, if it's the most you can afford and it's in a good area, you got good schools, got good government, police, fire department, all those things, it might be better to live there than to move into a bigger home in a worse neighborhood. Again, these are all issues that you have to resolve for yourself. Okay. By the way, the whole concept of budgets, I have other seminars that I do in regards to cash flow and budgeting and how you can do that. Hopefully we'll have these other seminars available to you in the format soon. Okay, so what can you afford? I already made note of this. There's actually, 4 parts to your mortgage payment. I call it a PITI payment. It's P. P stands for the principal of your mortgage. Okay, you know you have to pay back the bank. The second part is interest, which is the interest on the mortgage. And that ties into the fixed rate, the adjustable rate, that can fluctuate. The next part of that is the T, which is the taxes. Those are the real estate taxes. Some towns have what they call it, I forget, it's like a capital tax. There's all these little taxes. Different towns, different states have different taxes that they throw on people when they own a home. But the point is that those taxes, and be very aware of this, those taxes will always go up. Those taxes will always go up. So follow, if you get a fixed rate mortgage, and with the fixed rate, not the adjustable, if you get a fixed rate mortgage, your rate should be, your mortgage payment will be the same all the time for the entire period of the mortgage, 15, 20, 30 years. But the real estate taxes will actually almost always continue to rise. Why? Because governments like more money, and so they figure out, or people get raises and they say, well, we have to tax more people. School districts build new buildings, new classrooms, new everything, and so the cost of your real estate taxes will rise. Okay, it's actually like, for example, one of the homes I bought recently. Okay, my mortgage cost, because I was able to put 20% down and I rolled over some money from a previous house, my mortgage was only like $800 a month. Okay, now my real estate taxes when I moved into my house were $100 a month. So my PIT payment, that is my principal, interest, and taxes, was only like $900 a month. Okay, all right. My taxes have now risen to the point where my real estate taxes cost me $300 a month. So now my monthly mortgage payment is $1,100 a month, and I have a fixed rate mortgage. So you just have to be aware that those real estate taxes will go up. And in fact, if you've chosen a place that has good government, fire department, schools, all that stuff, you can count on that rising. That's something you have to take into account when you're thinking about where to live and how much money you have. The last one, the fourth item, is the insurance on the home. Now, what's interesting about this is that you can insure the home and its contents for a relatively small amount of money in comparison to the value. But the point is that most banks will require you to make the payments to them so they can pay the insurance. Okay, and we're just talking about homeowners insurance, but we're really talking about insurance on the home itself. Now, most homeowners insurance policies have personal coverage and all kinds of other stuff. Be careful. If you add a boat to your homeowner's insurance, okay, that will become part of your escrow. That will become part of your mortgage payment that you'll have to pay to the bank. Okay. Also, like for example, homeowners insurance, you can also have what they call supplemental addendums and scheduled addendums for, let's say, specific jewelry. For example, I have a high school ring that is very unique. In fact, it'd be like a Super Bowl ring. If somebody won a Super Bowl and they have this huge ring that costs, I don't know what they cost, $50,000, $100,000. Most of the people will take that ring and put it on their homeowner's insurance. And so therefore, but it has to be scheduled, and therefore they can cover that also. Again, that could be one of the things that would add up to or increase the cost of the insurance, okay? So the taxes and insurance, by the way, make up what's called your escrow account. Escrow is an old terminology from England that basically means that they take the money and they set it aside and they protect it as an escrow. And then what they do is they take the money from you every month, they let it grow, and then they pay the real estate taxes. One other thing about real estate taxes, they're normally in two parts. There's one in March for the county or the property tax, And then in August, there's usually the school tax. Okay, the school tax is always greater. It's always greater because the schools, again, normally cost more money. Okay, when you borrow money, you expect to pay it back with interest. There's a lot of accounting software, just general software out there where you can do what's called a loan amortization. What it will do is show you exactly how much interest and principal you will pay. One of the things I want to warn you about is that when you first look at the loan amortization, you'll be shocked. If you buy a $100,000 house and are paying 5% interest over a 30-year period, you're going to pay $200,000 to $250,000 in interest. In other words, you will be paying $350,000 for your $100,000 house. Again, that's normal. That's the compounding of interest against you, which is why banks like to do mortgages. Okay, so again, don't be shocked at how much that is when you finally see the number. We'll be back in a few moments with Taxes and You.
I grew up in a sports family. From a very young age, I was exposed to sports in a great way. My uncle was on the first pro basketball team in Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Ironmen. My cousins played baseball in the Army. I got to see them pitch at Fort Knox in Louisville, Kentucky. And my dad, of course, that was my hero. He was a basketball referee for over 30 years. Met a lot of great people. Have any of you ever heard of George Couples? He was a man who used to call our house and schedule my dad for City League basketball games. Just been a passion in my life, and as I got older I found out about horses, and I ended up owning a stable. And I was asked to be on a sports show with Roger Houston called the Meadows Racing Network. Watching Roger Houston direct and even produce this show. And when we were done, I said, boy, that'd be something great. Maybe someday I could have a TV show. Back in 2011, I had a conversation with some friends about sports that piqued my interest in how could we start a sports talk show on TV? Well, I found out I could go to public access TV in Bethel Park and I'd be able to produce my own sports talk TV show. The great thing about doing 2 sports talk shows on BPTV is I can share my passion about sports with thousands of people every week. If you are passionate about something that you would like to share with the community, I encourage you to come to BPTV and produce a show like I do. I'm Al Levine, volunteer producer of Pittsburgh Sportsline on BPTV.
Now we're back. Welcome. We were talking about what you can afford. There's a couple things about insurance that I'd like to mention. Your homeowner's insurance will be for the purchase value of your home. One of the things that you have to be careful about is that the purchase value of the home will never be its replacement value. In other words, if your home were to burn down, let's say you bought a home for $100,000. If you wanted to rebuild it, it's going to cost probably $140,000. So the point is, insurance companies will tell you you really should have a replacement value for your home. And that's a very good thing that they're telling you. But the question you have to ask yourself, the thing that you have to decide is, do I want to live in this house? Do I want to replace this house? Because you see, if the house burns down, you will get the money that you had for the mortgage. It's almost as if you sold your home. Then the question would be, and by the way, you would give the mortgage to the mortgage company, but you'll have back your original investment. So now the question becomes, do you want to rebuild that house, or would you rather go buy another house? You see, again, this is something people never think about. They all think, oh, I have to just rebuild. But in actuality, you could move someplace else. You might be able to find another home in the same area that's as nice or nicer than what you had, and for the reasonable amount of money difference. And so be aware that you don't always need replacement costs. The reason I mention this is, again, in the past, let's say I purchased a home for $150,000. I was carrying a $180,000 replacement value. One of the other things that will happen again, with a fixed rate mortgage, and I told you how your taxes will keep going up, okay, your insurance will also keep rising also, just for the same reason, the appreciation of the property, other things that happen, if you have any claims against your policy. The point is that there comes a point in time you say, wait a minute, I don't need all this insurance for my home, or you have to at least look at each of the different components of it to see if it's necessary to have it. I actually, my wife and I have actually decided not to use replacement value for our home because it was getting to be so expensive. In other words, we had purchased the home for like $150, and the fair market value of the replacement cost was up to like $240,000. Again, if I was going to replace the home, yes, if I wanted to rebuild it, yes, that would be true, but I know I can still buy homes like mine in the town I'm in for maybe $170,000. And so I don't, it's not worth paying, it's not worth it to me to pay for the extra insurance. But again, just be aware of it because it's important to know. The problem is, what you have to be careful of is if you don't have replacement value, okay, and you do want to stay there and you do want to rebuild, you're going to be short the money. So this is a discussion that has to take place between the spouses, or I should say the owners of the property, because not all, I mean, there's a lot of people now where 3 and 4 people own a home and all that stuff. And all those decisions have to be made by the people with the insurance, okay? The other thing is, remember that the homeowner's insurance does not cover all your personal property. Almost every homeowner's policy has a tiny clause that says, we'll give you $20,000 for your personal goods within the home. So if there's a fire that destroys the house, they'll give you a check for $20,000 for your furniture and clothes and golf clubs and everything. But if you ever sat down and added that all up, it's probably more like $50,000. The point being is you'd want to expand that portion of your insurance to cover that. Okay, this is especially true for jewelry. If you have antiques, heirlooms, of course, you can't replace, and it's almost impossible to value something like that. But the point is, and remember, whatever you insure, you definitely will pay to insure that, because the insurance company is going to in the business of making a profit. So the more that you insure, the higher the premium will be, and the more money the insurance company makes, which again is a good trade-off because that's the purpose of the insurance company. Again, the other thing too is you can discuss this with your insurance agent. I mean, sometimes insurance agents in general are decent people. They're not trying to fleece you, so to speak. They're just simply trying to help you to make sure that you have adequate insurance coverage. So that's kind of like the major points about insurance. All right. The next thing that comes up, and it's not so prevalent now because interest rates are low. When the fixed interest rate is relatively high, again, most people listening to this tape or seeing this show probably were not aware, but in the late 70s, the interest rates in the United States for homes were like 18%, okay, which is like phenomenal. I mean, that's like crazy. But the point is that they came up with this idea back then of paying points. A point is 1%. So if I had a $100,000 mortgage, a point would be $1,000. The idea behind a point was that it's actually, in layman's term, it's prepaid interest. In other words, if you paid points, they would take your higher rate and they would lower it. Okay? Now, the reason they were lower it, and trust me, they were not being friendly, the reason they were lowering is because you were paying up front. In other words, you were borrowing, theoretically, you were borrowing less money because you were paying them more money up front. But instead of reducing the principal, they called it prepaid interest, and they reduced the interest rate. So whenever someone discusses points, you always want to look into the fact, well, wait a minute, if I took the points and I use it as a payment down on the principal, what would happen overall in regards to my total expenses? And by the way, that's where that loan amortization software that I spoke about earlier, that's where this comes in very handy, okay? Now, the interesting thing is that if you pay points, it's very important that you stay in the house for a long time. You see, by prepaying points and lowering your interest rate, that's all fine and dandy, but the problem is it takes you a while to recoup that money that you paid in advance, that interest. It's like prepaid interest again. And it takes anywhere from 7 to 10 years just to get back to that number. Now, interesting thing is, what's the average amount of time that people stay in a home in the United States? Ready? It's 7 years. Now, there are some places in the country where people stay for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. But and there's some places where people stay 1, 2, and 3 years. Like if you go into Washington, D.C., I didn't know anyone that stayed in a house more than 4 years. Why? Because they made more money and they wanted to move to a nicer area. New York City is the same way. New York area is the same way. Chicago is the same way. People move to nicer suburbs, nicer places, nicer everything every 4 or 5 years. Now, it's ridiculous to pay points if you're going to move in 4 to 5 years. Why? Because you're prepaying interest that you're never going to pay because you're leaving the house. Very important to be aware of that. Also, the points vary from bank to bank. In other words, you might pay a point to get a reduction of interest rates by 0.5% or 1/4% or 1/8%. And trust me, 1/8% is a pretty decent amount of money when you come up with a sizable mortgage. Okay? Okay, the adjustable rate mortgages. I mentioned them a little earlier in the glossary. Again, and I explained how the adjustable rates adjust up and down. The reason that people do it is, number one, they end up with lower rates. Number two, and this is very important, it's easier to qualify for an adjustable rate mortgage. Why? Why would it be easier to qualify? Okay, and the reason is very simple. All of the market risk is on you. In other words, if interest rate goes up, the bank makes more money. If you can't make the payments, they can just throw you out. And then they get to sell the house and hopefully pay the mortgage and make more money. Okay? And so it's really nice because it's nice for the banks because they don't have to do many things. If you remember the housing bust, I believe it was in like around 2005, 6, whatever, that housing bust that occurred, most of it occurred because of the use of adjustable rate mortgages. What happened was they were all giving people adjustable rate mortgages. And remember earlier I said, and most people will know listening to this show, is that the interest rates have been relatively stable for like the last 20 years, 15, 20 years. Okay? So an adjustable rate mortgage seems like it would be a really good idea. Okay? The problem is if you remember earlier, I mentioned that they tie it into LIBOR, a London banking rate, versus the federal rates. And LIBOR has gone up and down during that entire 20-year period. It's much more volatile. And so people with adjustable rate mortgages have paid more in interest in some ways than people with fixed interest rates. Again, the key is to make sure you can do it. But again, I'm back to the adjustable rate mortgages. The qualifications, the documentation needed to get an adjustable rate mortgage is much lower level of documentation than if I want to get a fixed rate mortgage. Why? Because if you get a fixed rate mortgage, the bank is stuck with that fixed rate. They can't make any more money on it. But if it's adjustable rate, and the rates, by the way, if the rates go down, your rate goes down very little. If the rate goes up, your rate goes up a lot. The point is that the market risk is completely taken out of them, and so they don't have to justify anything. Okay? As I stated, there's usually a ceiling and a floor on an adjustable rate mortgage. Again, the key is calculate the ceiling. Can you afford to make the payments? And you might say, well, it's not going to get to the ceiling for 4 or 5 years. Okay, well, go ahead and estimate what you think your income will be, your set income, not overtime, not all that other stuff, in 4 or 5 years, and see if you think you can afford it. Okay? And again, in the old days, it was tied to the federal rate, or actually the Treasury bill rate was also used before. And everybody knows Treasury bills, like savings bonds. But now it's tied into LIBOR. And by the way, LIBOR stands for the London International Bank Overnight Rate. That's the bank, or that's the rate that international banks charge each other to lend money back and forth between countries. Okay, so you can see that that's a much more volatile base than the federal rates. Okay, now when would you like to use an ARM? Well, number one, the simplest reason is you're only going to be in the house a short time. In other words, with an adjustable rate mortgage, there's usually a ceiling every year, so it can only go up 1% a year. And normally, I would say that doesn't happen that often. 1% is a tremendous increase. The point is that if you're only going to be in a house a short time, again, using loan amortization software, you would look, okay, if I paid with a fixed rate, here's what the total cost would be. If I use an adjustable rate, it should probably be lower. The key, though, is again, is you have to be able to sell the house at the end of that period so you can step away from that mortgage. Okay. Again, I mentioned earlier, if you're expecting a bequest, a gift, or a large inheritance at some point, If the current rates are really, really high, but they're expected to come down, we do not have that scenario. We have not had that scenario for like 15 years. Balloon mortgages use the same reasoning, by the way, to justify taking them. Or if you can't get the loan any other way. I mean, sometimes people say, well, I have to do this. I can't get a fixed rate mortgage. I don't qualify. But if I do an adjustable qualifying, I can get into my house. Again, the most important warning I can make to you is if you don't qualify for a fixed rate, that's fine. But remember that if you take an adjustable rate mortgage, it will go up. And so the question is, at what point will you lose your house? In other words, you have to calculate how high can that adjustable rate go before I have a problem, okay? The other thing that you want to be aware of is that all of these things might not happen. All the things that we've discussed, like you think, oh, I'll get an inheritance. Well, what if you got written out of the will? You're banking on this money and all of a sudden you don't get it. Or what happens if you're banking on overtime and it doesn't work? Or you're banking on a promotion and it doesn't happen. I had a friend who was looking forward to promotion. Everything was wonderful. And his company got bought out by another international company. And 100 people lost their jobs, including him. Okay? The point is be careful about, I'm just trying to give you ideas and things that you have to be concerned about when you're doing this. Okay? Some of the other items to consider also, will you need to make improvements on the home? In other words, sometimes you buy a home. You've heard the phrase fixer-upper. Okay, well, if it's only minor stuff, then that's not too big of a deal. But if it's major construction, well then you might have to get a construction loan on top of your mortgage, a reconstruction loan on top of your mortgage. And there's issues that you have to be aware of. All that has to be calculated into how much can you afford and what can you do. By the way, the inspection we talked about earlier should be one of the things, this should come up in the inspection. And by the way, you could then ask for a reduction in the price of the house and say, look, I got an estimate, it's going to cost $20,000 to fix the floor joints because of termite damage. Okay, well then they'll say, okay, fine, we'll take it down $20,000. And then the point is, but you would still have to borrow that extra $20,000 to pay for the repairs. Or you could have the people pay for the repairs, one way or the other. But normally they'll want to walk away from the house. This actually happened recently with a relative. He was older, he lived in this house for like 40 years, and he went to sell it, and it turned out that there was termites in the attic. I don't know how they got in the attic. I have no idea. I always thought they were like underneath the ground. But the point is, they were in the attic. Okay, and what happened was some of the support beams had been like chewed through. Halfway chewed through. Now the people that were buying the house, this is amazing. It's absolutely incredible. They wanted to raise the roof, which means they would have taken off those joists anyway. And so they said, well, to fix that roof would cost $15,000. And so we negotiated and said, okay, since you're taking it off anyway, we'll reduce the price of the house by $5,000. And everybody was happy. Okay, so there's things you can do. And by the way, they had to borrow, of course, additional money to raise the roof and all that stuff, but be aware of that. And in fact, the inspection, a couple things that should show up. A is the roof. You always want to find out how long your roof's going to last. The reason is that roofs cost $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 to replace, depending on what part of the country you're in. And the point is that all houses need new roofs, like every 15 or 20 years. In some parts of the country, like actually the house I live in currently, it was built in 1945. Okay, when we bought the house, our inspector said that roof up there is all rippled and it's going to be bad, and you're going to have to replace it within 5 years. Okay, and we did. We replaced it in 4 years. We saved up the money and did it and replaced it. But that's where the inspector comes in. Now, we could have gone to the people and said, we want a reduction of the price because we're going to have to replace the roof. But again, that gives you negotiating power. Okay. Also, the furnace. Furnaces are relatively normal that they burn out after like maybe 15 again or 20 years, sometimes 10. Water heaters. In the house I'm in currently, I've been in the house about 17 years. I've had to replace the water heater twice. Again, it's important for all this to get a feel for all this. Also, the drainage. Drainage is probably the most important thing, especially if you're in hilly country, hilly areas like around the Appalachian Mountains, In the Midwest, it's not such a big deal because it's so flat. But the point is that you want to understand the drainage and where water is going to flow, because it can cause tremendous damage to your property. Also, again, in the Appalachian area, and somewhat in the Rocky Mountain area too, there's a lot of people that build retaining walls to hold up parts of the ground and stuff around from the driveways and different parts of the houses. You want to be very certain that those are stable and you're not going to have a collapse because of things. Also, is there any leaking? Is there any leaking that's occurring? Is there any water in the basement and things of that nature? There are some areas where you're just going to have water in the basement. It's just a given. Okay. Now you can pay a lot of money to have the outside fixed and covered and all that, or you can put in a sub pump. There's a number of different issues, different ways to resolve that issue. But you do need to know, because leaking water causes mold, and mold has become a major issue in a lot of real estate. By the way, again, I will, not to belittle them, but most of the real estate people you'll deal with, the agents and everybody else, they'll all poo-poo all this stuff. Oh, mold's not that big a deal. Oh, drainage isn't that big a deal. Oh, the roof is okay. Those roofs last 20 years. Everything that you're going to bring up, by the way, these are good things for contingencies also. The point is, everything that you bring up, they will just try to say, oh, it's not that important. Okay, it is that important. You really do need to look at all these different aspects of purchasing the house. All right? And by the way, some of this stuff, like for example, let's say you do have a leaking basement, and let's say that people do take $5,000, $10,000 off the cost of the home. It's important for you to negotiate with the bank to try to have that $10,000 added to the mortgage so that you can actually pay to have that work completed and done, so that the house is in good shape when you finally move into it. Okay. One of the other things you have to remember when you're budgeting, do not forget that you will have to do repairs and maintenance on the house. Okay. There's always things that go wrong in a house. I mean, my wife and I laugh about it and call the joys of homeownership, where just the silliest things break, and you just have to fix them, and it costs money, and you have to put money aside to do those kinds of things. In fact, some of the other things that you're going to need, and I'll just throw these out, you're going to need a lawnmower, you're going to need some kind of snow removal if you have a house. One of the first things we did when we moved into our house was bought a bunch of shrubs and trees to cover certain areas that we didn't think were that pretty. Shrubs and trees and plants and flowers, those things, while not terribly expensive, are expensive and need to be something that you budget for. Also, even if you're not a handyman, there's certain tools you have to have. What I found is that people live in apartments, they have no tools. I mean, they might have some car tools, but they don't have some of the basic tools you need. And by the way, the number one tool I'm telling you you're going to need, or number one type of tool, is plumbing tools. I'm just telling you. I'll never forget trying to tighten a wrench, or trying to tighten a bolt or something, or loosen it or whatever with a crescent wrench. It was like the worst thing I ever tried to do in my life. So there are certain tools that you absolutely have to have. But again, this will come up as you're working on it, as you buy the house, as you move in. The point is you need to budget for it. That's the point I'm trying to make here. In other words, you're going to need to buy $200-300 worth of tools just because you're walking into a house for the first time. If you're buying a investment property, well, that's different. You probably have most of those tools if you already own a home, or you might be hiring a handyman to take care of the things and whatever. But again, that has to be budgeted when you're doing the budget for your real estate. In the next show, we'll be talking about the Schedule E, which page 1 of the Schedule E, which is tied in to the taxation and how you record the expenses and the income and all the different items. It's where all the rental properties are recorded. By the way, in the Schedule E, you're allowed to put 3 rental properties. So if you have 7 rental properties, you would need 3 Schedule E's on your tax return. We'll go into each of the expense categories and how you can maximize the expenses to reduce the taxable income. Have a great day.